Mr. X is working in company Y, and company Y is selling 10 different products. There's employee advocacy, right? Where the employees have the free will to go into an advocacy platform, choose content, and publish it as theirs, right?
Because we're in this time of, I think, AI perfect everything, where you sort of give out a particular prompt and you almost expect this word perfect answer. I think it's those imperfections that make us very human. For example, today when you look on Google also, you type something and I'm looking for a Chinese restaurant, which is something very specific. Google will give me a summary, which is probably Gemini driven, where I don't even have to look at any pages. I don't go beyond the first page at all because it gives me the answer that I want.
Hi, I'm your host Pamela from Bangalore, India, and you're tuned into Season 2 of Transition Story. You're about to hear an enriching story driven by self-belief, passion, a lot of resilience, and personal growth. I'm so excited to welcome our next guest to the show.
The last 20 plus episodes that I did in Transition Story, I invited people who had stories about moving from career A to B. While Karn, who is on the show today, has a story to tell, the theme of the show has slightly pivoted to see if we can enable people who are listening to the show with the right set of tools, technologies, and knowledge to be able to build that transition story for themselves, right? And as it goes, having a good personal brand has moved from a nice to have thing to a must have thing. Now, an established personal brand is like a career insurance. So I feel that you can redeem it whenever you are in crisis. And there is enough data to prove that people with great personal brands have been able to recover from a job loss maybe 40-50% faster than people who don't have any industry presence. With that, let me introduce Karn Malhotra, who is on the show today. And Karn has been a graphic designer in his younger years, and he's now transitioned to a personal branding expert. I've worked very closely with Karan, so I can vouch for his skills. We will explore in this show a little bit about personal branding, Karan's background, and hear a lot from him on how we enable ourselves with this ever evolving social landscape and this pressure of technology that we are all carrying with us. So, with that, Karan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Pamela. Appreciate it.
All right, Karan. So, tell us a little bit about your journey as a graphic designer and how you went on to, build multiple companies before becoming a personal branding expert.
Sure, certainly. Thank you. Most kind with the introduction. At the outset, I actually got into design completely by accident. I didn't do so well in my 12th boards, and I had to sit out a year because we had tried the CET exam again. Before I knew it, I then was in design college where I could just show up one day and, oh, today's exam. So give me some paper and give me some, coloring sort of utensils, etc., and then just sort of get on with it. And what I enjoyed about that experience was pure expression of that just creative instinct. And I think I'm circling that to this moment here and now, where what I enjoy about the work that I do today is the fact that it's a lot of it is just around conversations and helping the creative instinct of specific individuals come to the fore, right? And my role is really as a catalyst for clarity, along that. But I've had my, there have been many sort of milestones along the way. And, to your question, after getting into design school, I pretty much straight out of college started my first company, which was Exit Design, which I ran for about 16, 17 years. It was a B2B branding company, did a lot of really interesting work. And B2B, communication, a lot of it is just around trust building, right? Because a lot has to do with relationship building, and especially when you're looking to build a relationship that lasts, that needs that investment on both sides, and a lot of that just comes from time, right? Like I remember we were working with a client, a big manufacturing company based out of Coimbatore, and then there are a couple of big ones over there. And I remember I was making this presentation to the board, but then it seemed that I had to, get to know a few additional nuances. And that came from spending time with the general manager, having chai at the chai kade, just opposite the factory, or going and spending time with a local club. I didn't understand Tamil, but I had to make sort of build those relationships. So relationship building essentially around different kind of communities has been a a constant in the few different things that I've done. I mean, post exit design, a lot of those learnings I took into building an AI design automation tool. This was in 2015 to about 2020. Just think of it as a B2B version of a Canva,
Mhm.
and again, around trust, branding, a lot of the time is just about consistency, right? How is it that whether as a company or as an individual, how do you show up consistently? Because that consistent narrative is what people talk about you, say about you when you're not in the room, right? Whether you're a company or whether you're an individual. And around that consistency is what I was taking a lot of my service learnings into this platform, which was a tremendous set of learnings. From that, I learned how to, not coming from a tech background, learning how to manage tech teams and, and sell tech, etc. Great learning over there. And I moved on from that because we took a fair amount of time to get to where we had to get to. And some other time we have to say, okay, I need to do the next thing. And for the first time in my life, later in my career, I decided to join the client side, because I was always curious about what is it like to function in some of these companies, right, in branding and marketing. And some of my peers, head of brand at Twitter and head of brand at Google, etc. And this company that I eventually joined as head of marketing is Talent 500. The founder Vikram, he and I knew each other from childhood, but had lost touch, sort of got back in touch. Great learning over there. I did another stint at another company in Turkey. And in early 23 is when I decided, I mean, one key learning I had when you're working for someone else is that you don't 100% own your time. And, I think being a lifelong entrepreneur, I really liked owning my time. So it was this thing of, okay, what is it that I would like to build again? And then in 23, I got back into building This is Creative AI. That's the name of my company now, which is focused on AI workflows for in-house marketing teams. And one of those teams actually said, "Hey, can you help our MD with his personal brand?" I was like, how hard can it be? Yeah, I know a bunch of tools, so we'll figure it out. And as it turns out, it is, like you said at the top of this conversation, it is something that a lot of people are very conscious about today, and rightly so, because we're in this time of, I think, AI perfect everything, where
Yes.
you sort of give out a particular prompt and you almost expect this word perfect answer. I think it's those imperfections that make us very human, help you really sort of really stand out. But then it has to sort of be done in a way where you're really helping the brightest parts of you sort of stand out, and balancing that with some other things that you have to also be honest about in the conversation.
Great.
So that's really led me to my focus on personal branding today.
Excellent. And what I heard is personal branding is, of course, important, but you landed up being a personal branding expert in the last 2 years by an accident where somebody came to you with that ask and it became an interesting find. And I know you did mention about it a little bit in the beginning, and I introduced you also as an expert. But why do you think in today's world where technology is leading a lot of the conversations, right? Around business, around human beings, around news, everything is tech led, right? Even print paper has now transformed into our mobiles through apps where we are listening into stories or where we are reading stories. So why do you think personal branding in today's dynamic world is important in the first place? Like, let's address the elephant in the room. There is a school of thought that says, I just drive my job search with my skills. I drive everything in my professional life with what I bring to the table. Why do I need to really put myself out there and go loud and talk about it? Now, a soap or a chocolate or a packet of chips needs that
Mm.
because there are many of them. How does it transpire to me as an individual? So, what's your thought on why is it so important in the first place?
Thanks for the question, Pamela. I think a little bit of context over there, right? If you look at the last 15, 20 years, one side of the story is the number of large, I mean, the challenges that have happened in markets at different point in time, whether 1999, then 2008, and then, beyond that. And so you have companies like starting from, you know, Enron to Bear Stearns to so many, even Sam Bankman-Fried, SPF from that crypto platform, right? Last year, I mean, there've been so many of these stories where companies are given a sort of a free rein, and then they sort of function a certain way. And even recently, when we had the conversation with an Indian leader saying that you should be working between 60 to 90 hours
17
a week,
70 hours a week.
70 hours a week, right? So, I mean, so everyone has a right to their own perspective. I think what, with a lot of individuals making certain kinds of choices and then that leading to, companies showing up a certain way, I think what today increasingly then, therefore, what that has led to is that people being skeptical about, okay, someone is saying something, but the company is behaving slightly differently. So I want to first see whether the company and the leader, are they aligned with
Mm.
whatever it is that being portrayed, right? That goes down to, sure, it can be the CEO who's the head of the ship, or the chairman or the president, whoever it may be. But it also comes down to individual. You're a sales leader, right? So this is Pamela is our lead, and then this is the narrative that she's sort of building. Her actions, her words and actions, are they in line with what I can expect? Is there some dissonance? And
Mm.
that's, like I said earlier, also brand experience is actually held by the person who's actually experiencing it. We might be saying something, but it's now when I'm not in the room, that is actually the reality of my brand. I exist in the listening or the space that sort of exists, right? So I think leaders, it's important for them to pause and be aware of this, because this is the reality that sort of exists. It's not to say that it's not necessary that everyone has to do this. In fact, what I find in, when I work with different clients today, the ones where we have a great working relationship, or it works really well in terms of the likelihood of hitting results really well, is when we're working as partners and there's mutual synergy, and that comes from that person inherently knowing themselves that, okay, I want to put out a certain kind of narrative, because I think managing that is very important. If I share it from a different perspective, if you look at it in a corporate company context itself, or in a company context, right? My one other key learning was that it's very important to articulate your value very clearly, because then that can show up when you're having conversations with leadership, when you're having conversations, whether it's in a performance review or whatever it may be, right? Being able to clearly articulate what is it that you have created and where is it that you have delivered value. Now, if you're doing that in a company, now imagine you fast forward today. I think some of the most powerful personal brands have got to a point where they're doing it so well for themselves internally. They're also doing it really well for themselves externally by way of maybe sharing their perspective on LinkedIn, having their own newsletter, actively taking part in, a CIO conversation, being part of webinars, etc. Now the opportunity there, therefore, then becomes that this person, because their brand is so strong, that the company is almost, a little afraid to lose them, because if this person leaves, then they go to my competitor, then they take potentially a certain amount of goodwill with them, certain amount of business
Correct.
potentially with them. So what I'm trying to highlight over here is that while someone might say, why do I need to do this? It's worth considering what's actually happening in the market and why is it that other people are investing in this.
Mm.
And if I would just look at geographically also, right? Personal branding or founder led marketing, as some other people sort of coin it, typically a lot of these things, they will start in, say, in the US or in Europe, and maybe 1 or 2 years later, they'll sort of catch on in these parts of the world, right? In Asia and otherwise. Therefore, there is a certain degree of maturity around founder led marketing or personal branding or leadership led marketing, where you have companies generating 60 to 70% of their ARR through the founder actively posting, sharing really deep, insightful content on this platform through their newsletter, etc. In fact, there's a really good book written by Dave Gerhardt called Founder Marketing, which I would highly recommend. It was when he was head of marketing. So there was Intercom, and I think there was Drip. There was this other chat bot competitor to Intercom, and they were only going to launch 1 year later in the market. So there's this 1 year lead time. So what Dave did really well, and that became the almost like the gold standard in some ways, where in that 1 year he booked the founder on a whole bunch of podcasts. They started their own podcast, which they would do regularly. He got the founder invited on a whole bunch of other panels and other podcasts, etc. They were writing a lot of stuff out there. So what cumulatively ended up happening at the end of that 1 year is that where today people might think, okay, now my product is ready, now I should sell. They had been selling and creating awareness and creating that goodwill about everything that this person is about, everything that they're not, what the product is about, who is it for 1 year. So cumulative, when they actually got out of the gate and they wanted to sell, they were pre-booked. So they're already closed pipeline for a good couple of quarters ahead, and that's a fantastic place to be. So this is just to highlight some of the opportunities of looking at this conversation a little differently.
Absolutely. And this goes back to my chips and soap analogy, right? Do you see there's a potential difference between a commodity slash corporate marketing versus a personal branding exercise? You did mention about the founder led marketing piece, right? Now, if Mr. X is working in company Y and company Y is selling 10 different products, and there is there's employee advocacy, right, where the employees have the free will to go into an advocacy platform, choose content and publish it as theirs, right? Does that qualify as personal branding, or the employee's point of view on a certain subject or on a certain article written by the company, or could be an advocacy content, republishing that with their own point of view, is that personal branding? So a little bit of spotlight on how does personal branding differ from a core corporate branding exercise?
A great question. Yes, it very much is. Let's say, I'm working at a ghee brand, right? And or at a dairy brand, and there are so many different products that are out there. And I hail from Gujarat, and a lot of our products are these organic products that come from Vapi, which is there are these particular cows that sort of come from there, and it's A2 milk, and there's all that sort of story. And the company is putting out all the benefits of that, right? But let's say, in addition to a new product that they've just launched, which is, skim milk, A2 skim milk, something they put out there. There's a great campaign. Along with that, I repost that particular post on my page, and I say, this reminds me so much about the times when it's so hot in Vapi. And I remember, walking to school early morning, the one thing that I would look forward to is that there's be this lassi guy who would be there at the bus stop, and I'd buy something from there. Now that's a personal story, right? And what that does is that it only shines a shinier spotlight on the brand itself. Employee shared content compared to traditional brand marketing is 16 times more effective potentially, because it gets that much more eyeballs, only because here is an actual individual who's sharing a specific perspective around this little narrative. Otherwise, what consumers might see is, acha, okay, they've launched something. Oh, it was a nice advertisement. Oh, it was funny, etc. But people buy from people, right? People buy from people when they know, like, and trust them. So when, let's say, Pamela has heard about this new brand, oh, it's interesting. But when she sees a post with Karn and his little childhood anecdote, maybe that makes it a little bit more relatable, and brings a smile. And it hard data suggests that, therefore, in that situation, Pamela is more likely to then actually click on it. So what in effect it does for the company, when you have employee advocates, and this I think is a very big opportunity, and this is actually an area of work that I'm working with a couple of companies on, which is where you have your leadership themselves, or you have content leadership program in some ways, where you're helping companies also understand the value of, sure, you in learning these things you can set your clarity around the narrative that you want to build for your career. But in the near term, if there are 60 employees who are actively posting out, that translates into a certain measurable amount of earned media, which otherwise the marketing team would have to spend money on, right? If it's done well enough, that can positively impact two things. One is it can positively impact sales and marketing motion, depending on who's sharing what kind of narrative. Second is, if you are again doing it well, it can impact creating a certain narrative about the company and lead to better quality applications, so people want to join the company again, because people are talking about this company. It's not just companies
Correct.
saying, okay, I have this job, so you should join.
Yeah, so more or less what I hear is it is about the trust and authenticity of the brand, which gets re-established because an individual is kind of adding their personal story to that whole brand narrative. With that, it's a nice segue into, you mentioned about earned media. So social media has completely disrupted the way branding used to operate 20 years back versus what it is now, right? So it's completely changed the way people kind of build and showcase their personal brands, right? So if 20 years back I had an instrument to put myself out there talking about who Pamela is as a person, my only instrument would have been my resume. But there is only limited real estate on my resume. It's very static in nature. But today, if I have to put myself out there, I have multiple social media channels where I can go and choose. And it's not only LinkedIn or Instagram or Facebook. There are Quoras of the world, there are Reddits, and there are so many options, right? What are the biggest opportunities and challenges this dynamism presents, right? Are we going to get lost in a channel war, or are we going to over glamorize LinkedIn for B2B and move to other platforms for B2C or D2C? What are your thoughts on that?
Great questions. I can only share from my own sort of learning. A lot of my work over time, right from when I first started my company, was primarily in the branding space and B2B space, which is why I think in some ways I'm fortunate to now be operating in this space specifically on led brands on LinkedIn, because it's a B2B focused sort of thing. And that's my biggest learning, right? I mention that only because I haven't done extensive amount of work in, let's say, advertising or D2C marketing, but I'm a fan of the branding and marketing game. So I have some broad thoughts which I'll share. Today, I think the obviously everyone is trying to corner a little bit of their own market, right? LinkedIn has a billion plus users, but only about 2 or 3% of them are active by way of posting every week, right? So then that's a very small percentage. So 30 to 40% are just consuming content, and how the platform, it disincentivizes people actively sharing links. For example, you put a post out there, etc., and you put a link, the reach sort of drops because LinkedIn wants to ensure that people spend time on their platform. And that is also a subset of, if you look at it, how SEO has developed over time, and what's actually working really really well right now is zero click content. Where, for example, today when you look on Google, also you type something, and I'm looking for a Chinese restaurant, I'm looking for something very specific. Google will give me a summary, which is probably Gemini driven, where I don't even have to look at any pages. I don't go beyond the first page at all because it gives me the answer that I want.
Everything that you needed.
Exactly, and then that leads to other conversations, that the behavior is changing, where people are maybe not, there is a it's not that people are significantly moving away from Google as much as they're also in the last 2 years have embraced the idea of having a conversational search. So I'm not necessarily asking Google everything. I'm asking ChatGPT, I'm asking Claude, I'm having a conversation and searching something. So therefore, how is it that you create content that then shows up, that ensures that you will show up in the results within those things, right? So platforms will always try and do things where they're trying to hold your attention or your corner bit of the market, because it ultimately comes down to revenue for them. What I do see is happening more and more now is where in some ways people are really, because they everything has become highly programmatic. So traditional brand marketing, programmatic advertising, etc. Again, I'm just saying, because there are stats. Like there was a study done by, I want to say, IBM, which did a CEO survey. No, I don't know if it was IBM, but it was a survey of CEOs, 2,500 CEOs. And again, over there, they found that leader-led marketing, etc., is giving 158% higher returns compared to traditional brand marketing. What that is also now starting to happen, as we've seen over time, is that people are focusing more into niche communities, and what's happening even more so now is that these niche communities are almost going dark, where they're not really actively putting out, oh, we're pushing this and everything that we have sort of done. Okay, now we're going to put it out on LinkedIn. Now we're going to put it on Instagram. We can put it on the newsletter, etc. If, let's say, for example, for you as a sales leader, right, you might be targeting. You have a certain quota that you need to hit, a certain revenue target that you need to hit, and it's just math. You say, okay, if I have to hit 100, I can get 10 into 10, and I hit 100, or I do 5 into 20, I hit 100, right? So you just need between 10 and 20 customers. So what's working really well now is where people are doing targeted, focused sort of, let's say, circles or groups or closed rooms, which might be event based experiences or micro communities, which are paid for, which are gated, but then it's only those people. So people are not even, before they hire someone, before they look at marketing CMOs, before they go into looking at a tech stack and looking at reviews, and before they look at G2 and all these other places, they're going into these communities. So therefore, I think if there is all this closed sort of off-platform activity that's happening a lot more of, where people are going to these communities and fandoms and micro niches, and that's what's like one of the things. There's one gentleman I follow. I think his name is Eugene Bradley. Eugene is his first name. He talks about trends and brands. And one of the things that he said is that luxury today is privacy, is the fact that how can you be invisible and still in the know of stuff and get a lot of stuff done and available. So I think, these are some things to sort of consider in the context of traditional marketing versus sort of people in marketing.
Karan, we covered some great stuff so far, right? We discussed about your journey. We discussed about the importance of personal branding. We compared personal branding to corporate branding. Now, and we discussed a little bit about social, right? The word social introduces a lot of anxiety in people, right? Because there are so many platforms. Now, how do you prescribe or suggest individuals cut through this noise and this mayhem of multiple channels and still stand out authentic in terms of talking about themselves?
Great question, Pamela. So it's interesting you mentioned social, right? Because even in this thing of building a personal brand, you'll still have some people who are introverts, some people are extroverts. And for the extroverts, it might be relatively easier. Of course, you have to have a content structure and build a plan, etc. But even as an introvert, you can do this. What I would say is, let's say if you solve for an introvert, right? Let's take a hypothetical scenario. Someone who's not particularly keen on putting their narrative out there, but they see the benefit of it. Maybe they have colleagues who've been doing it. Maybe their marketing department, someone has advised that you should do this because it'll help the company and also help your personal narrative as well. So I would say someone like that, firstly, don't get overawed by this thing of having to post 4 or 5 times a week. Just start with one high quality post a week and do that for the first 2 months, right? Because what that will do is that it will build a habit of how is it that you're actually going to create some of this content. What kind of feedback are you getting from it? How are you able to manage it with your hectic calendar any which way? And then you also start thinking of what things do I do within the writing itself. Let's say, for example, a typical LinkedIn post, there are some, your first 2 lines right on top of it, which is called the hook. You want to write it a certain way so that people get a sense of what is it that they're actually going to read with the rest of it, right? So but these are learnings that you have as you spend time on it.
Yeah.
And so I would say, think of, and then in terms of putting it out there, making it a regular practice, also think of it as what might be a couple of content pillars, what might be a few things that you can talk about repeatedly. And the way I would think of that is, when you go into a new client meeting and you're meeting someone for the first time, and this is, let's say, a prospective customer, you might spend the first 5-10 minutes just doing a meet and greet. You're getting to know each other a little bit, developing a little bit of rapport. Then you spend, let's say if it's an hour long, you have, say, first 10, 5-10 minutes you're doing that. The next 30 minutes or so, 30-35 minutes, the meat of the meeting, you're spending as you're talking a little bit about the value that you've created around the service that you're hoping this customer will buy. And you're talking about the wins that you've had from the past. And you're also talking about actively what is it that this thing can do for your customer here and now. And then when you're done, it's about another 10-15 minutes before you're going to end. You're sort of wrapping it up, and then you're doing a little bit more of a rapport building. On LinkedIn or any other platform in the context of building a personal brand, it's pretty much the same. But I would say you split it up as 2 or 3 content pillars, which might be, one is don't shy from talking about your own personal story also. It's a professional platform, but one of the things that I think, as a professional platform, too many people take it too seriously. So what actually works is a little bit of irreverence and sharing your personal story. Like I have posted about my triathlon journey. I've posted about design hackathons I've done. The one time I met, the billionaire Melanie Perkins when I was building my AI design tool. All of these, let's say, and you, Pamela, you might find that, oh, I have an interest in design, and Karan has actually built this design platform. That could separate you and working with me compared to many other people who are in the same space. So it's the same thing. Don't shy away from talking about your personal a little bit. Second, if you're doing 4 posts a month, one a little bit about yourself personally, but the second and third, definitely focus on what value you've created for customers in the past. It can again be sort of a scenario based story. This particular narrative for this kind of customer in this geography, this was the challenge solution impact, broadly in that sort of context. Because ultimately, when people keep coming back to your profile, they want to know what is it that you do and what is it that you can potentially do for them, right? So you want to share that actively. And the last thing I would say is that today the opportunity is almost about writing your book in public, where you're sharing different anecdotes of what it is that you're doing here and now, and these can become a collection of chapters that become your book eventually, right? So don't think of gating anything, don't think of holding back. If anything, the more you share it openly, the more trust you're building, and the more you're positioning yourself someone who knows what your core focus is, and you know it really well, and you're confident enough to talk about it openly.
Wow. So many, very potent advices and recommendations. Now, we discussed what potentially people should do. Now, having coached so many clients on their personal branding journeys, having worked with multiple brands, what do you think are the common pitfalls? Because there are mistakes people do in this whole personal branding exercise, and sometimes that leads to disasters. So, let's discuss first what are the mistakes that people should avoid.
Well,
And
I think it's, going back to what we say, right? People like to buy from people, and people like to buy when they know, like, and trust you, right? And that's what you want to sort of establish. So, if on your, let's say you're a MD of a manufacturing company, and you've won a bunch of patents, and you've come out with these really new, interesting, innovative services, and you want to push the service, and you also want to hire more people because you want to grow your company. In doing this, what I'm describing now, which is if you're posting, oh, check out our new product, and oh, this is the new brochure, oh, you should see this, oh, there's this new job post that is available, and reposting that. That's the equivalent of you walking into a store and immediately, the salesperson coming and say, sir, madam, we have this new thing, would you want to come and see? And coming back every few minutes and doing the same thing over and over again. You
that's a great comparison.
Yeah, I mean, like, and it's not enjoyable for anybody, right? In that sort of situation. And now think of it, how odd it might sort of look if you are someone who is a MD, CEO, founder of a like a 500 crore company, or you're, VP of Accenture or something like that, right? And you're sort of talking that way. There's a lot of really interesting stuff that you can share. What people are coming to your page is to know what is your perspective on it. Sure, you've got this great service and there is this job opening, but why should I join it? What is my experience going to be in working with you in your company? What went behind actually creating that specific thing? How did you get to that patent? When you talk about all that stuff, it just humanizes the individual and the company so much more, makes it so much more relatable. And when that relatability happens, that's your opening into the door, right? I mean, that's your foot in the door. You built a bridge over there, and then then everything after that becomes a little easier.
Nice. So we discussed a lot of important things, Karan, and that brings me to reflection space, right? Where we kind of try to close this, reflecting on your entire experience in marketing and branding. What do you think are the top three or two things that stand out for you in terms of branding as a space, as a subject, and that could potentially become like your giveaway to people who are listening to this?
Well, I think don't get caught up in jargon and anything else. Ultimately, it's about stories, right? People love stories. Like, one of the books that I really enjoyed reading, because the title said how to win friends and influence people. But to me, when I was reading it, and maybe it's like a 200-page book, every first or second page was a story. And that's all he was doing. He was just talking about how to win friends and influence people, but through story narratives, right? So if you're whether if you think back to the relationships that you have from childhood, with schools, with in college, or in friends, right? The ones that really bind you is because of those, maybe some crazy things that you did together, or those unique experience that you had together, but those were stories, right? So I think it is very important today, especially, and connecting to something that we spoke about earlier, Pamela, that in this world of AI, everything and tech forward everything, right? I think the imperfections are something that is very important to lean into, because when you lean into, and I'm going to quote something from a recent conversation I had with Lizzie Azarino, who is this leadership coach, and she said, if you lean into your integrity, it opens up space for someone else to lean into theirs, right? And then you can have an authentic conversation. And that could be over coffee, it could be on a newsletter, it could be on LinkedIn, it could be in a webinar. Everything doesn't have to necessarily be put out there. But I think people doing the work that's needed to lean into themselves, to unlayer all the things that there's been some sort of programming that we've gone through as we've grown over time and into the roles that we've become. Ultimately, it's not this persona or this projection that people connect with. It is what's behind that and what's true to you. So it's worth it to do the work to get back to that and then sort of project, because that is your defining light, and I think that's what people really want to see more of.
So, what I'm taking away from this conversation is authenticity should not be manufactured. Authenticity is who you are. Try to work on that self that you want to show up as. And that's what people connect to. And that's what your personal brand will stand out for. So, with that, Karan, I would like to acknowledge the fact that I've learned a lot from you in my own journey of putting myself out there on one of the social media platforms and trying to talk about my experience. And I know it's a dynamic journey. It is going to have milestones as we move along. But before we close, one last thing is, do you see in the next 10 to 15 years this industry really transforming leaps and bounds? Because you have seen the last 15 years or the last 20 years. How do you see the next 15 years in this mayhem of AI, where there are multiple B2C platforms, multiple B2B platforms, which promise the outreach, which promise all the vanity metrics that brands look for, including personal brands? So, one last thought, and then we close.
I think, if anything, it's even harder to say, to predict how things are going to be, given the cycles of technology adoption and scaling are getting shorter and shorter and shorter. So, who would have predicted what ChatGPT has done to the world, like 4 or 5 years ago? That said, I think if I were to just sort of, have some fun over here and say, if we live in a world where we sort of wake up and you live in a no interface world, and that's already been happening for a little while, right? Where right now we're talking on a two-dimensional sort of surface. It's a flat surface as a screen, and we have a screen with your phone, etc., and other stuff. And in time, it will come where you're living more into a minority report kind of thing, whereas everything is just projected reality. You already have your Facebook sort of Ray-Ban glasses, and you're seeing interfaces, everything projected over there, right? And if you're talking about neural link, and it's an implant sitting in your brain, and you are tapped into the source, endlessly, all of that. I think what will really make the difference even then is, how is it that a certain set of emotions are firing in you, and how real are those, or how are those real that you're truly feeling and then therefore projecting and talking from that space, versus talking, something being a combination of things that have been manufactured and pushed it out there. I could have said that recap any better, Pamela, and that everything comes down to it being authentic, presentation of your own voice and you showing up that way. And I think if anything, that will be a single greatest differentiator in this time where, today we're two humans talking to each other, tomorrow it might be there are two humanoid versions of us talking to each other, who knows, so authenticity and being the real true you is definitely something I don't think will necessarily go out of, will remain timeless for some time to come.
Yeah. So since the beginning of the conversation till we concluded, I feel we have been talking about authenticity in a very big way. Being true to yourself, putting that true self out there will hold good no matter how much of technology layers we put to this whole ecosystem. New channels would come, the way we show up will change, but what we show up as continues to be that original self of us. And
Yes.
that is what personal branding is all about. Thank you so much, Karan, for spending this time with me today, sharing all your wisdom. I am sure a lot of people will benefit. And for the audience, Karan is a personal branding expert. So you know whom to go to if you have to build your personal brand. And I'd love to look forward to another round of conversation 15 years from now and see if that changes in any way. And I'm sure it will not.
Of course. Thank you so much, Pamela. Really appreciate you having me on, on the show, and look forward to more such engaging conversations in the near
Thank
future.
you.